Before I introduce our special guest, I would like to give thanks to the sponsors of today's lecture. First, the Thomas F. Fay Peace Through Law Endowment for Excellence. I'd like to personally thank Tom Fay for his generosity in funding this particular event. And then second, I'd like to thank the Center for Civil and Human Rights, and specifically Jim McElroy and Kevin Fry for their support of this event, and Kevin's great work in promoting and advertising the event, which, as you can see, has been quite effective because we have a full house right here today. And then I would like to thank at the same time the student organizations that have co-sponsored the event. We have the Notre Dame chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, the International Human Rights Society, and the Notre Dame chapter of the ACLU. And so we appreciate and thank you for your support on this event. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker, Paul Lewis. Paul Lewis is a son of Notre Dame. He is a double donor. He received his undergraduate degree from Notre Dame in 1980, a degree in history, and then he graduated from Notre Dame Law School in 1980 and 1983, and graduated from law school in 1983. And but since then, he's gone on to have an absolutely stellar career. And as I told the students in my first year of criminal law class this morning, Notre Dame promotes itself as a law school that is committed to training a special, different kind of lawyer. And that concept, that goal is personified here today in Paul Lewis, because he has dedicated his career to public service and has served our country in many important and different capacities, most recently as the Department of Defense Special Envoy for Guantanamo Detention Closure. This is in the Obama administration. But prior to that, he was a judge advocate in the United States Marine Corps, an assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's office, and a trial attorney in the organized crime and racketeering section of the U.S. Department of Justice. After that, he made somewhat of a dramatic career change and moved to Capitol Hill, where he served as general counsel and minority general counsel for the House Armed Services Committee, and then again, most recently, as the special envoy. And so we've invited Paul here today to talk about the legacy of President Obama with respect to Guantanamo Bay and President Trump's challenge with respect to Guantanamo Bay. And so with that, I'd ask you to do a very, very warm Notre Dame welcome to the event.
All right, well, thank you everybody for showing up here today. Thank you to Professor Gurule and to the law school and to the Center for Civil and Human Rights. It's always a pleasure to be at Notre Dame. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and it was an honor and privilege to serve the president as the special envoy to close Gitmo. One fundamental point I want to make, the lecture has been styled as Obama's legacy and Trump's challenge. I would say at the outset, it's the Bush-Obama legacy, because as you'll see, President Bush wanted to close Gitmo just as much as President Obama. This is not Obama. President Bush transferred 530 plus detainees out of Gitmo. His administration made the considered judgment. The national security leadership said in their best judgment that the costs of Gitmo outweighed the benefits. So that was, both presidents who've looked at Gitmo closely have come to that conclusion. The current president has said that he disagrees. And what I'm saying in public and in lectures and to the media is, I hope he reaches the same conclusion that the two previous presidents once he looks at the facts, looks at the intelligence. It's one thing to say people should come to Gitmo. If we use force as a nation, we're going to have to detain people. If you use force, you have to detain people. Everybody understands that. The issue is whether they should be detained at Guantanamo. And Bush and Obama looked at all the factors, and I'll weigh those with you and discuss them, and said the costs of Gitmo outweigh the benefits. Current president isn't there yet, but I am hopeful, number one, that after time, he'll realize Gitmo is not the place. It hurts us. And number two, at a minimum, even if he takes people into Gitmo or takes people into detention, he realizes that you can still transfer, that it's not a one-way street. One of the issues with the international community and over the years has been Gitmo seemed to be a one-way street, and it seemed to be a legal black hole, and there's no due process. And we're beyond that now. We transferred people under President Bush. We almost transferred everybody under President Obama, and I'm urging the new administration after time, we're 1 month into this, when he gets his people into place, when he talks to his people, he looks at the intelligence. There are folks right now at the Heritage Foundation, previous Bush administration policymakers who are already telling him, keep the transfer process open. So we'll see. So that's my point. This is not Obama and Trump. This is two presidents, the presidents in office while Gitmo was opened, who made the conclusion that it doesn't help us in the long run. So where are we right now? We started with about 800 people at a maximum at Gitmo in its height. As I said, President Bush and his administration transferred about 530. When President Obama started, there were 242. We're down to 41. So almost got to the goal line, didn't come across it. But the president made a good faith effort, and I'm proud of what we did. We made a difference. Out of the 41, there are 3 buckets. 5 are eligible for transfer. 10 are currently being prosecuted in the military commission system or being sentenced. And then 26 have been found not eligible for transfer, which basically means the collective national security group that Obama formed looked at them and said, they're too dangerous to transfer right now. So my writ from the president and from Secretary Hagel and Secretary Carter was to transfer everybody that's eligible. So we did everybody but 5. So I think that's a pretty good number, starting at 240 plus to get down to having only 5 that remained eligible. And I can't talk about evidence. So one of the problems with Gitmo is everything is classified. All the intelligence about detainees are classified. The security assurances with the foreign countries are classified. So it's hard to have an informed discussion. But what I'll say is the New York Times, which I personally respect, has said that of the 5, one of them refused to get on a plane. We had a country for him, and he didn't want to go. One of them nobody wanted because he still had some issues. One of them, his home country decided it was too late to take him. They came in late December, and to transfer someone, you have to give Congress 30 days notice. So there wasn't time. And then, according to the Times, Secretary Carter said that he didn't feel comfortable with transferring 2. So I'll just say, I can't talk about evidence, but that sounds about right to me. And I think 5 out of over 100 is a pretty good record. So I was charged with transferring them. Transferring ones who we felt we could transfer safely. Not all of them. As I said, there's some who are not going to be transferred, and that's the issue. If you close Gitmo, where do you send them? And President Obama said he felt they could be sent safely to the United States. Congress didn't agree, and we're going to continue to have that discussion. But what are we really talking about? Since 9/11, and even before 9/11, we're talking about balancing liberty and security. So everybody wants to protect the country. The people that want to keep Gitmo open, the people want to keep Gitmo closed, hopefully in the future. Everybody wants to protect the country. The issue is, how do you protect the country? And as President Obama said, keep our values, keep due process, have a process that both is subject to the rule of law and that the international community respects. And we're seeing that in many different areas. We're seeing it in cyber, we're seeing it in surveillance, any number of issues. But Gitmo has kind of become the narrative for that. So why did the two previous administrations say that Gitmo should be closed. 4 primary arguments. Number one, and this is primarily the Obama argument, it costs too much. Wildly expensive is the term, and I'll get into the details, but we're at the point right now where with 41 detainees and the budget for Gitmo, it's over $10 million a year for each detainee. And we could do it cheaper in the United States. I'd submit we could do it just as safe as we do it at Gitmo. The second argument, which you're familiar with, is that it's a recruiting tool for the bad guys, for the terrorists, and a propaganda tool. And that was very important to President Bush. He reached that conclusion. President Obama reached that conclusion. General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the former chairman, said that Gitmo really hurt us with those bad guys. Now, if we close Gitmo and send them to the United States, to Charleston or a military brig or whatever, sure, the people that are opposed to the United States using force will say, yeah, they'll still use it against us, but we'll take away the initial issue that we did not listen to the international community. We did what we could. Those that hate us are going to continue to hate us. What we're trying to do is talk to the reasonable people in the international community, the governments that have told us they're worried about this issue. So that's issue number 2. The third issue for closing Gitmo, which I find to be the most persuasive, is it hurts us with our allies. Our allies say that we shouldn't be doing it. And numerous times when I went on trips as a congressional staffer and as the special envoy, the governments, our colleagues, our allies would say, it's just not sustainable. We don't think you're doing the right thing. Now, they could be right or they could be wrong because they're basing this on allegations that might be conflated with Abu Ghraib, that might be conflated with CIA holding people, not Gitmo per se, but Gitmo to certain key allies has become a symbol, and it hurts us with our allies. I have been in meetings with members of the British Parliament, members of the House of Commons, who said they would argue against sending a detainee to the United States to be interrogated because they didn't trust the United States, or they would vote against their version of the military appropriations bill because they did not want to aid the United States. So it does have foreign policy ramifications. My former colleague at the Department of State, Cliff Sloan, said that a very close ally of ours told him the single most important thing the United States could do to help counterterrorism is to close Gitmo. It just hurts us around the world. So that's the third argument. The fourth argument was President Obama's argument, who made the moral argument, who said it's against our values. We don't detain people indefinitely without process. And there are arguments for and against that, but he basically said, we're better than this, and Senator McCain is continuing to make that argument. So those are the arguments that, again, in balance, the leadership of the national security community said, close Gitmo. Not that Gitmo is bad or wrong. It's safe and humane, and certainly the detainees that are kept there are not going to escape. That's the argument to keep Gitmo open. The second argument is if they come to the United States, they may get constitutional rights and a court may release them. And we can talk through that, but the Department of Justice made a study a year or two ago at the request of Congress and basically said, we will be able to detain detainees in the United States safely. If a court, no court has ordered anybody released in the United States. If they did, it would be appealed. We'd ask for a stay. We would work it out one way or another. And Congress can actually work the laws so that they can have a special provision for if you're a Guantanamo detainee, you won't be released. So I think those arguments can be addressed. The third argument would be, well, if you keep some guys in the United States and transfer the others are going back to the fight. And the argument, that the number you hear is 30%. And that's another point I want to make forcefully. So the argument, the statement that you hear is that 30% of Gitmo detainees have either gone back to the fight or are suspected of having gone back to the fight. And that's an important distinction. So the suspected category is a category used by the intelligence community that basically says there's one source that could be corroborated, uncorroborated, that says the detainee, there's evidence the detainee may have gone back to the fight. So that's not a high standard. It's just one uncorroborated source. And it doesn't mean they've gone back to the fight. It means that they're suspected. Now, it's important. That means basically we have to take a close look at those detainees. But it's not 30%. It's about 15% suspected. So the overall re-engagement rate from Gitmo for both administrations is about 15%. Figures change. They're classified. I'm talking about the public numbers right now. But that's basically about it. However, there are two different transfer policies under the Bush administration, and I'm speaking broadly, but the thought was they would transfer detainees in groups. So they would transfer a block of 30 to Afghanistan, a block of 10 to Pakistan, something like that. There wasn't an individualized assessment of the threat of that detainee. So the numbers for detainees that have gone back to the fight under the Bush administration are higher. Under the Obama administration, it's about 5 or 6%. Still too high, but the legal standard is that the Secretary of Defense can't transfer somebody unless he believes the threat is substantially mitigated. So we transferred with the understanding there was the possibility they may go back to the fight. We can't have perfection, but we'll do everything we can. And frankly, if they go back to the fight, we know it and we'll watch them. So the real number I would submit to you is they're about 6% have been confirmed of going back to the fight. That's high. It's higher than we like, but it's a number that I feel is reasonable. Because what we can't quantify is the number of people we're radicalizing by keeping Gitmo open. Those people that are using it as a propaganda tool, are being inspired by it. We can't quantify it, but we've had reports from the field, General Petraeus, others have said Gitmo is hurting us. It's creating people who don't have all the information, but they see the symbol, they see the orange jumpsuits, and they say Gitmo is wrong. It's America. So those are the arguments in favor of it. It's too expensive. We can do it more cheaply. It's a recruiting tool, propaganda tool. It hurts us with our allies. And then the former president's moral argument. The arguments in favor of keeping Gitmo open, it's certainly safe. They're not going to go anywhere. They won't get any rights, although they are now subject to judicial review in Gitmo, and there's no chance that they go back to the fight if we do it that way. So again, it's not a win either way. It's a balancing of the risks. And the national security leadership of both the administrations that have looked at it said, on a case-by-case basis, it's worth transferring a detainee. We get the number down to those that are too dangerous to transfer. Right now, the number would be 26, and then maybe the 10 that are in military commission. So under 40, send them to a brig in the United States. No one has ever escaped. There may be a threat against the brig, but we'll get on top of it. And it'll take my phone is ringing, unbelievably. So I will turn it off. Sorry about that. When I lecture at Georgetown, I don't take the phone, so sorry about that. So that's where we're at with Gitmo. I think we made a difference. The president really tried. He picked up the phone. He talked to foreign leaders. He did everything he could. So what we did under my watch was, when I started, there were a lot of Uyghurs at Gitmo who were basically, they're not Al-Qaeda, they were not Taliban, they got swept up by mistake, but we couldn't transfer them because they're basically Chinese. We couldn't send them back to China because the State Department was worried the Chinese would torture them. So we transferred all the Uyghurs. We started transferring Yemenis. One of the reasons why the Gitmo numbers were so high is there are a lot of Yemenis. We can't send somebody back to Yemen right now. It's basically a failed state civil war. So we had to find a third country that would take, a problem, somebody that's been detained at Gitmo who's not one of their citizens. And so we started that process. It was delayed for a while under the Obama administration. If you remember, the underwear bomber had ties to Yemen. So President Obama said, we're not going to transfer any Yemenis for a while. But he lifted that moratorium in 2013, and we started transferring folks to third countries, and 30 countries have taken detainees that are not from their country, and a lot of them have taken Yemeni. So there's world support for closing Gitmo. Over 30 countries have taken in something they didn't have to deal with. And I'm also proud of the PRB process. It's the periodic review process. So again, one of the issues is you detain enemies, you keep them off the battlefield. We are allowed to do that under the Geneva Convention. It's not like the law enforcement scenario where you have to charge someone. That's been the discussion. We're detaining these people indefinitely. You can keep the enemy off the battlefield. The issue is it's been 14, 15 years. So after the courts got involved, after the Supreme Court said, look, you've got to have some sort of review process, which Geneva does require. The Bush administration had a couple review processes, but they were only DOD focused. What the Obama administration did, President Obama, under an executive order, we all know about executive orders, that can be repealed by the next president. So, but currently, there is still the Obama executive order to have this review process. Every detainee that's at Gitmo has a review by this board of professionals. So it's not political. It's career professionals from the intel community, from justice, from DHS, from the joint staff, so the military has a vote, from the State Department and DOD, look at this detainee and say, we're not in 2002 anymore, it's 2017. Are they still a continuing significant threat? If they are not, if times have changed in the country is more stable, if we believe that detainee has a plan to go back and work, again, it's subjective, you have to look at these people very carefully, but my point is it's career intelligence officers who are doing this. So every detainee of the 41 has been reviewed by that process. Many of them were made eligible and were transferred. So again, it's no longer a legal black hole, and I'm proud of that process. It's an interagency process, but it's driven by DOD. I think I bring a unique perspective to this. I talked about my career in Professor Garule's class, but I started in the Armed Services Committee in 2005 as a counsel. I was handed the Gitmo portfolio on day one, and the Republicans were in charge. So I was a Republican counsel for the House Armed Services Committee from 2005 to 2006. I then went to DOD and worked for Secretary Gates as his legislative counsel, again, dealing a lot with Gitmo because that was a big issue. When President Obama won, the new general counsel, Jay Johnson, who's gone on to be Secretary of DHS, said, Paul, you've worked for the Republicans, we appreciate it, but I'm going to bring my own guy in. And I said, absolutely. But after a month, Mr. Johnson, now Secretary Johnson, said, we'd like you to stay. So I then worked for the Obama administration, again, with the underlying theory that both of them wanted to close Gitmo. So after a year working for Jay Johnson, the Democrats from the Armed Services Committee, so I'd worked for the Republicans, the Democrats asked me to come back as their chief counsel. Again, 40% of the issues that I dealt with when I was on the Armed Services Committee as a lawyer were detention related or Gitmo. Out of all the things you can think of, the Armed Services Committee dealing with, Gitmo was almost half my time because there's always a veto threat by the president, whatever. It always came down to we have to get this done to pass the bill. So the Democrats, I guess, respected me as being a fair player and being impartial. And so I came back to work for the Democrats on this issue. So the ranking minority member of the committee was Adam Smith from Seattle, and he really, really wants to close Gitmo. So even with it being 40% of the issue, it was important to him. So I probably would talk to the White House five times a day on how to close Gitmo. So when it came to the point where the president wanted to have a special envoy, they asked me, and I said, sure, I'll try to make a difference. And so we didn't close it. We got the plan was to get the number of detainees that were eligible for transfer to 0, go to Congress and say, we've got 40 detainees. Seriously? We detained hundreds of thousands in World War II. Cannot we do this safely? 40 people. And the theme was we would go to Senator McCain, who wants to close Gitmo. So the chairman, the Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee, supported President Obama, and see if we could get him to get to good on this. And then if we got the Senate, go to the House, where it'd be a higher lift. There's no John McCain in the House, and give them a grand bargain of some sort. Say, if you give us authority to close Gitmo and bring detainees to the U.S., we'll give you a deal on immigration, or we'll give you some planes, or something like that. But, that's the way Congress works. But Congress was not receptive. In retrospect, it probably was not going to happen. Just the politics, having been on the Hill for as long as I had, number one, I think the majority of members disagreed with the decision with the judgment of the Bush and Obama administrations. They felt, from their point of view, I'll give them their due, that they felt it was safer to keep Gitmo open. And I honestly think politically they didn't want to give the president a win. We were at the point where this was known as Obama's legacy. It was something that he wanted very much. And just my opinion, they were not going to give him. So he came close. So I'll tell you what I believe, and then I'll tell you what I think we are with the challenges, and then we're already going very late, so I'll jump to your questions. What I believe is both sides want to protect the country. I worked for President Obama. I worked for Jay Johnson, but I'm a former Marine. As General Counsel of the Armed Services Committee. My father served in the military. My grandfather served in the military. I want to protect the country. But I also believe Congressman Walorski from this district, who is strongly opposed to closing Gitmo, wants to protect the country. Two, I believe that the Department of Defense in the United States has a right to detain detainees. If you are fighting the United States, if we are in a battle, if we are in a war, Geneva says you can keep the enemy off the battlefield. Problem is, it's been a long time, so I think you have to have some sort of due process, and I think we do with the PRB. Third, I agree with President Bush and President Obama. Gitmo hurts us more than helps us. It's just a subjective opinion, but when you travel around the world and every meeting starts with, why aren't you closing Gitmo? When you see people being beheaded on YouTube videos wearing orange jumpsuits, again, orange jumpsuit could be a prisoner or could be Gitmo. When we're at $10 million per detainee, and again, we'll pay whatever money we need to defend the country, but when you can do it cheaper in the United States, why not do that? And I agree with President Obama. It has hurt us around the world morally. We can do better. And Senator McCain says the same thing. And then the final point I agree with is with President Obama. He said that closing Gitmo was a national security imperative. That's a strong word for a president to use. We're hearing strong words in Washington all the time, but he could have said Gitmo should be closed. He could have said, I believe Gitmo should be closed, but he said it's a national security imperative. All four Secretary of Defenses who worked for President Obama agreed with him. Two of them who are Republican, Secretary Gates and Secretary Hagel, were both Republicans. The leadership of the national security apparatus at the end of the Bush administration, again, Secretary Gates, Secretary Rice, Condoleezza Rice, all said Gitmo should be closed. So when I think you have that collective judgment of the people who do this day by day, that's more important than the judgment of Congress. I think Congress, on the merits, should look at this and say that Gitmo should be closed. So each of these issues I can talk about in more detail, the cost argument, the propaganda argument, but I want to get to your questions while we still have time. So I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, questions from the audience. So starting in the back, yes, sir.
Thanks very much for coming back to Notre Dame, Mr. Lewis. I'm Doug Castle. I teach international human rights law here. I'm most concerned about the future and how we get from here to there. I agree with your arguments for closing Gitmo. So in terms of formalities, which officials theoretically ought to be the most important on this decision? And then in terms of realities, what can you tell us about what you think General Mattis, General McMaster, and General Kelly view on this question?
Sure. So it should be interagency. So number one, it should be the transfer process that President Obama had. To make a detainee eligible for transfer, you had to have the career professionals at DHS, the Attorney General, ODNI, the Intel folks, the Joint Staff, the military, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense all agree that it was proper to do. So we still need to have that interagency. The White House drives it. So there needs to be, somebody in the National Security Council that is looking at the broad perspective. Again, I disagree with them bringing people to Gitmo, but if the president wants to do that, that's his prerogative. But to remind the president, to remind the policymakers that, DOD does not want to be in the detention business. DOD wants to fight, and they'll detain who they have to. But if their own country wants them back, or another country wants them back, let's think about that. And the way you do that is you find a country that's willing to watch them, that's willing to keep them from traveling, take their passports, whatever they can do under their domestic laws, ID cards, whatever, but say you cannot travel. Tell us what they're doing, share information, and then be willing to put into a realistic rehabilitation, reintegration program. My concern is when you have two special envoys, it's a luxury in Washington. I went from general counsel having a portfolio as wide as you could get to one issue. There's nobody driving it. There's nobody saying, okay, there's recidivism, but there's also radicalizing. We're radicalizing people in Pakistan and other countries because of this symbol, which we can eliminate by sending them to the United States. So there's got to be somebody at DOD and state to drive the process. So at DOD, there's not going to be an envoy. So it'd be the Undersecretary for Policy, which is vacant right now. My boss, the Undersecretary for Policy, was also a Notre Dame grad, Brian McEwen. So we had some interesting discussions. And then at state, it probably will have to be regional. It'll have to be the Assistant Secretary of State in the region, in the Middle East, pushing it. I have not met General Mattis, but I'm disposed towards Marines to begin with. We have to think through the civilian-military balance, but it's not a bad thing for short term to have a couple four-star Marine officers with a president who's not experienced in this. So, and as we all know, Mattis is a thoughtful guy. He's a historian. My sense of his thinking is that he'll do what the president wants to begin with, and that closing Gitmo is not a priority right now. They're focused on other things. They're focused on Syria. They're focused on Russia. They're focused on the refugee ban. So he's not going to push it. But when the time comes, he'll tell the president what he thinks. But I don't think he's going to be as forceful as General Dempsey was. General Dunford, I think, will go along with the leadership. So you said Mattis, and who else?
McMaster and Kelly.
Okay. Kelly, General Kelly, I know very well. So he owned Gitmo militarily. He was the commanding officer of Southcom. He and I had extensive conversations. He's a good man. He's a thoughtful man. He has said that politics aside, his preference probably would be to keep Gitmo open. So he's probably not going to push for it, but he's an honorable man, and if he's going to have to be told by someone else to do it. But he'll also say that there were hundreds of detainees transferred successfully under Obama and Bush. Then McMaster, again, he's a thoughtful person. Read his book on Vietnam if you haven't. I don't know what his position on this is, but all three of them are going to tell the president what they believe. I am sure of that. They are going to be very forceful. My concern is if there's a disagreement between Mattis and Kelly and the White House, that they don't stay. that they may be here for a very short term, and then I don't know what the option would be. So does that answer your question, Professor?
Thank you.
Start? Okay, all right.
Bill, with that?
So we've arrived at a perpetual state of war, which is unfortunate in many ways, but one of the things that concerns me with Guantanamo Bay in this state is the minimum criteria for housing individuals at Guantanamo Bay. Can you discuss what that minimum criteria is, given President Trump's statements that he wants to expand housing of individuals at Guantanamo Bay?
Right. Well, one of the problems with Gitmo is you all remember the original photographs when the 20 detainees were brought to Gitmo on January 11th, 2002, 4 months after 9/11. And the whole reason Gitmo was created is because General Franks, in command at the time, was worried that there'd be attacks on the prisons and the detainment facilities in Afghanistan. There had been one previously in which 200 people had been killed, one American CIA officer. He said, I don't want to be protecting ourselves from attacks. We've got to do it somewhere else. And the argument for Gitmo, without going into too much, was that it was safe and that it was couldn't bring them to the United States in 2002. Politically, we could not do that. No one was going to do that. So where would you go? And Gitmo is unique in the world that the United States controls it, yet the other country that actually is sovereign there can't tell us what to do. So we thought about Germany. We thought about bringing them to Rhinebeck or whatever, but we'd have to talk with the Germans, and we might have to get involved with the European human rights community. But Gitmo is a lease. It's a perpetual lease, $4,000 a year, pretty good bargain, that both sides have to say no to get out of. So we're going to keep that bargain. The Cubans can't get out of it. So the Cubans couldn't tell us what to do. But it was also not subject to complete judicial process. So that's why Gitmo was picked. So you started off, they weren't ready, so they're literally detainees inside barbed wire and orange jumpsuits without permanent facilities. So that did not look good. Then they went to cement, cinder block, and tin roof with running water. And then after about 3 years, they built state-of-the-art facilities that are fine. So if the detainees are compliant, it's communal living. They have their own cell, but they have TV, they have books, they have halal food, which they get to select, and it meets the standards of both the Bureau of Prisons and the international community. The minimum standards under Geneva is it has to be not cruel, not inhumane, and not degrading. So I don't think the president has that much leeway. It's not solitary confinement. They can be housed in an individual cell, but that's if they attack the guards and things like that. Now, did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
No, I meant like, what's the criteria for like bringing someone to Guantanamo Bay? So,
gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
I read General Kelly's enforcement memo that was published last night,
Right.
and I'm very concerned about that in terms of the expansion of the domestic deportation force. Whether those people would qualify as enemy combatants, as an invasion of the American sovereignty, whether that could be an enforcement mechanism there.
I haven't read the new paperwork word for word, so I'll reserve judgment on that. But what I can tell you is the president has said he wants to bring some ISIS people. I think ISIS guys is his language, to Guantanamo. So we have two standards for detaining people at Gitmo. Under international law, under Geneva, a sovereign state that's using force can keep the enemy off the battlefield. So that's our international law position. Domestic law, it's the authorization for use of military force in Afghanistan, which was passed a couple days after 9/11, which basically said you can use force. Back in 2002, it didn't say detain, so that was one of the issues. The argument was, well, if you use force, presumptively you have to have the ability to detain, but it was not in the statute. It's since been amended. But you can use force against Al-Qaeda, Taliban, people that helped the 9/11 attacks, and then it was amended to say associated forces. So the issue is going to be what's an associated force. So the law is old. All the lawyers in the room are like, we need to update it. Writ large, the Republicans are like, let's just give the president authority to detain anywhere in the world for unlimited time with the theory Congress could jump in. The Democrats are like, no, let's scope it geographically. If we need it in Syria, let's do it in Syria. If we need it against ISIS, let's do it against ISIS, and let's do it for like a year or two. And they can't meet. Obama tried with ISIS. So there's going to be a legal challenge if the president tries to bring somebody to Gitmo, either ISIS related, does the AUMF cover ISIS, or if it's somebody living in the United States under your theory that they're a danger to the country, whatever. I mean, the prong would have to, I haven't seen Kelly's language, but the prong under the AUMF would have to be associated forces. So you'd have to have evidence that they were working with the group or whatever. The other issue that we talked about is whether American citizens can be sent to Gitmo. The president said yes. The statute says no right now. Gitmo is for aliens. It's not for Americans. Okay.
Let's see, yes, at the back.
Is there like an age criteria? Because when Kader was detained 10 years ago almost, he was under 15.
Right.
So what we are expecting next, if we're gonna bring like ISIS guys here, are we expecting any child soldiers or people under 15?
I haven't seen any discussion about the age. So Omar Khadr was a Canadian who was, I think, about 15, if not younger at the time. It was alleged that he threw a grenade and killed some Americans. He was subsequently transferred to Canada, but he was very young. But there is no age limitation per se that I have seen right now.
In the back, yes.
I was late and they have addressed this already, but my recollection when the discussions first started at Gitmo and the images were released, it wasn't only the treatment of detainees, obviously, but it was also the fact that many folks felt, and maybe in line with what you're saying about associated forces, that many people were in fact guilty. How confident are you about the guilt of the detainees that are currently at Gitmo?
So yeah, the one of the issues was that the intelligence might have been skewed, that we picked up some people that maybe were in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's an allegation that there's bounty hunting going on, that warlords were being given $5,000 in figures for getting a detainee. There were some mistakes. So we've had two things since then. We've had the review process. We've also had the Supreme Court saying, after several degrees of litigation, that everybody at Gitmo has habeas corpus rights. So every detainee at Gitmo who was asked to have a habeas review has had a federal district court or court of appeals say, we legally detain them. So there's nobody there that DOD doesn't think is not there improperly right now. There was at one point. We're now down to, there are 5 people who I think have a argument that if we find the right country that can do the security assurances, which is again, keeping an eye on them, keeping them from traveling, sharing information, and rehabilitating them or reintegrating them. If we find the right country for those 5, I think we can detain them. The 10 that are being prosecuted are going to stay in the military commission system for quite some time. That's a separate issue. The 26, they'll still be reviewed, and they're on the more serious end, most of them. So I don't see we're going to see a large number, but the right guy to the right country, maybe. But I'm confident that we're legally holding the 41. Now, with politics being the way it is right now, the way to fight Gitmo is going to be through the courts. So, all my colleagues in the defense bar at Gitmo are gearing up to say it's been too long. Detention is fine, but you can't do it for 15 years, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to see a lot of lawyering. And Justice O'Connor said, yeah, you can detain them while there are hostilities. It's going to be, what's the end of hostilities? Congress is not going to declare the end of it. That's something that's going to have to be looked at very carefully. We don't know. We don't know. Yes, sir.
Okay, I have two things. First, we use the death penalty as a bargaining tool. Why can't we use that with,
Under Geneva, you can't do that. They are enemy.
what about our basic common law?
Right.
Does it assert that?
It's a treaty that we have signed, that Congress has ratified, that all we're doing is keeping the enemy off the battlefield. Now, what we're doing is we're prosecuting 10 of them, and the death penalty is on the table for Nashari and the 9/11 5. I don't know if it is for Heidi al-Iraqi, but they're being accused of war crimes. So it's on the table for them.
And the second thing
Right.
is on your trial, has anybody thought about using 6 ordinary American civilians and 6 politicians? I think the jury system works very well in our country.
Yeah.
People aren't as dumb as politicians think we are.
I think politicians have the highest respect for the American populace. They should. But no, military commissions is unique. So there are 2 ways to prosecute somebody for a war crime. The traditional civilian Article 3 system, in which you would have a trial of 12 citizens picked. The problem is the Obama administration decided that the 9/11 cases would go to a military commission. So it would be a jury of military officers. Second issue, if you have a civilian trial at Gitmo, where are you going to get the juries from? There's nobody living at Gitmo full time that's not involved in the process. So you to bring people from Miami, I don't know. And you to keep them on the island for a year and a half. DOJ has looked at that and said they can't do it. So, but military commissions, it's going to be interesting to get, you basically have members of our military saying, you know, you guys are the enemy. There are going to be issues about whether that's fair or not, but we're years away from that.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll let you.
Yes, sir.
Can you discuss the benefits of having an offshore detention facility like Guantanamo Bay, and are there options other than, I guess, transfers to foreign countries? Or,
Right. So the options for detention are in theater, so you keep them in Afghanistan or Iraq, whatever. Most of the host countries are not capable of doing that. We don't want to do that. We have concerns about human rights abuses or whatever. You do it some sort of international tribunal through the UN or through the Hague, and I think that should be explored, but it's just politically not going to happen in the short term. And number one, the U.S. does not want to give a foreign country control over somebody who we think may fight us. Gitmo or another offshore location or the continental United States. That's, or a ship. And Geneva basically does not say you can keep people on ships for a long period of time. You can do it for short periods of interrogation. We did that with Warsami. And we have a tradition. If you remember, during the American Revolution, the British kept American prisoners of war in New York Harbor on ships. And it wasn't a very good situation. And we've kind of always said we're not going to do that as a country. So the question becomes, yes, Gitmo is safe. No one, the enemy is not going to invade Gitmo and take detainees offshore, or they're not going to get on a boat and go somewhere. We have Coast Guard cutters, we have the Navy, we have maybe submarines. It's pretty safe. The question is, even though it's safe, are we radicalizing more people than we would if we brought them to the United States? So I submit you could find a military brig where they'd be just as safe. Or, I've jokingly said this for years and years, if we think an island is fine, find an uninhabited island in the Florida Keys. So it's the United States. So the world is not saying we're hiding them offshore. They're technically in the continental United States. We could do that tomorrow, but that would cost several $1 billion. And if we're worried about costs, we're not going to go there. But, if we're going to keep some guys from Gitmo detained, and hopefully not forever, I just don't think it's sustainable to have guys in their 80s and 90s. It'd be the Spandau, the Caribbean. But if we're going to keep some Gitmo guys, and if the president wants to bring some other guys in, Yep, maybe build another facility in the Florida Keys or somewhere where, so no member of Congress has to worry about it in my backyard. You know, Rubio would have to worry about it, but you know, he can say it's offshore, so no problem. But yeah, Gitmo is safe, but I think an onshore facility would be safe. But we can't count the number of people we're radicalizing by Gitmo. That's the problem. We can say 6% have gone back to the fight. We can't say how many are fighting us, but you know, there are a lot of young Pakistanis, according to polls, who don't like the United States. Part of it's because of drones, but part of it, I mean, if they're executing people in orange jumpsuits, that's not a good sign.
So we talked a little bit about the transfer process to the U.S. for the 36.
Right.
Theoretically, where are some potential landing spots, and how much would this realistically cost to make it beneficial?
So the argument you heard is Gitmo is X number of million per detainee per year, and that number is a little high because it takes into account military commissions and all of that. The argument was 78,000 per year for detainee in Florence, Colorado. It would be more than that because there's special things you have to do because they're not prisoners, they're detainees. So there's a big joke about, well, why do they have a soccer yard? Because Geneva says they're not prisoners, they're detainees. So you have to have recreational facilities. So say it's $150,000 a year, but it'd be significantly less than Gitmo. But there would be costs in transferring, taking everything from Gitmo to the United States. So the report the president sent to Congress last February was, yeah, there'd be an initial transfer cost. Once that's done, we would save a lot of money by doing it in the United States, but it wouldn't be as cheap as we would think, but it would be a lot cheaper.
I think we have time for maybe one more question or someone. Yes, you had your hand up.
Hi. Part of the problem with Gitmo seems to be not only the holding, but the secrecy surrounding it. So the periodic review board, the lack of information, the classified documents that the Defense Council receives.
And the security assurances from foreign countries are classified.
But the legal black hole seems to be possible because you were fighting a war, an active war that required that.
Right.
Because that active war no longer exists, what therefore is the restriction or the limit that doesn't allow these people to come into the United States, since it seems
we're still at war in Afghanistan, and we still are, the DoD has got boots on the ground. So the AUMF, so our legal standard is the authorization for use of force is still in effect. No one has declared hostilities over. So our position would be, number one, we still have an enemy who we don't want to tell them how we know what we know, disclosure of sources and methods. And then number two, it's still classified. If it's classified, it has to be declassified. So we were trying for transparency. So the review process, part of it is public. The defendant gets to make a statement that's public. They have an attorney. The attorney makes their statements public. But then when the rubber hits the road with the evidence, that's still classified. And that's, with cyber, with surveillance, with Gitmo, the issue is how to, in a democracy, do you have an informed discussion when 90%, I know that detainee X is a bad guy because I've seen the intelligence, but I can't say that to the public. They have to rely on my opinion. And that's just something we're sorting through. How do you try somebody based when some of the evidence is classified? So we're working through that. I mean, Obama tried to be as transparent as he could. Folks would argue that he fell short, but if you're still engaged in hostilities, and according to Congress we are, you have to be very careful about disclosing stuff because they're watching this stuff, very closely. Oh, how do they know such and such? And the intel community. So anytime a document, we want to review it for classification, CIA has to look at it, the entire intel community, justice. It's complicated, but yeah, it should be as transparent as you can make it. One more?
Last one here, Sean.
Building on Jody Ann's question, can you tell me about the ICRC visits right now to Guantanamo? Yes. I've read, I'm not sure what I can say, I'm not sure what you can say, right. But I've read reports that some of the detainees in one of the small baskets that you mentioned
Right.
are now not speaking to the ICRC. And then two, the largest basket you talked about with 26
Right.
detainees, you said that they're there because they're too dangerous. Are you saying that none of them are there because the evidence against them was the result of torture?
No, I'm not saying that. So ICRC, the International Red Cross visits Gitmo on a regular basis. They visit 4 times a year, and then anytime a detainee leaves, they do an exit interview. The issue is, in order to work with the United States, it's got to be confidential. So they tell the United States things, the United States tells them things, and they work it out. But if the IC were really upset, I think they would go public. But there are concerns, the ICRC is concerned about 14 years. It's not torture, but 14 years of not being charged, and Amnesty is concerned about that. But the ICRC is a regular presence. In terms of 26, no, what I'm saying is each of them has been reviewed by the Periodic Review Board and been found to be a continuing significant threat. Some of those 26 we would like to prosecute, but either the evidence is too old or the evidence was not going to be able to get through the chain of custody. So you had a soldier pulling somebody off the battlefield, not a cop doing chain of custody and vouchering stuff. So we know where we got stuff, we can prove it, but we probably can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And some of them, yeah, there's concern that the military commission says you can't use, or it's the judge's discretion, whether you can use coerced evidence. And there is, the CIA guys that got brought to Gitmo in 2006, there were 14 that were part of the renditions program. The government has admitted some of them were waterboarded. And yet that evidence is not admissible in military commissions. But the legal standard is there's still a continuing threat. So 10 are being prosecuted. We're not probably going to get much more that are prosecuted. Thank you for your help, Sean. Again, Civil and Human Rights group has been wonderful.
Well,
I can stay and talk.
Okay. Well, let me again thank Paul for returning home to Notre Dame and for his service to our country. I think our country is very fortunate to have a man of such confidence and integrity representing it on these very important issues.
Thank you.
And thank you for your reflecting so positively on Notre Dame. And then last, again, I want to thank the co-sponsors, specifically the Center for Civil and Human Rights, Jim McAward, and the student organizations. Kevin, again, for your great job of promoting the event, and thanks again.
Well, thank you.